Monsters, creatures. Our movie screens for many decades have been filled with Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Universal monsters are some of the classic ones, though throughout history the boogeymen have gotten a little more realistic, serial killers and creatures of talking dolls and ghosts. But Frankenstein, he's probably my favorite monster, and really it's Frankenstein's monster. The werewolf gave me many nightmares, and yet we have had in our own culture ideas of creatures and people believing that there are creatures really out there, like the Loch Ness Monster, some type of monster in the deep, or perhaps Bigfoot might be roaming the woods. Monsters. History has had many monsters, the Kraken and other monsters that have existed in ancient writings, believed to be real, the Grendel, the Kraken, others, that terrified ancient sailors and hunters and people, stories that really gave people fright. But does the Bible mention monsters? Does the Bible talk about creatures? Really? I mean, is the Leviathan a monster? Is that something that was real? Or are we misreading that idea? Did the scriptures teach of the behemoth? Are monsters in the pages of the Bible? Tonight we're going to talk about that. And we're going to particularly pay attention to the Leviathan, the creature, the monster from the deep. We'll be paying attention specifically to the book of Job, chapter 41. Are you ready for this? So we've looked at monsters, popular monsters, historically monsters in the Bible. Before we dig into that a little bit, I want to tell you the story of Job, give you some background on Job. Are you ready? All right. So check out this information as we think about this book. First thing I'll say before we dig in, Job is in your Hebrew Bible, your Old Testament. And if you look in your table of contents, it's a great way to see the layout of the Hebrew Bible. You have Genesis through Deuteronomy, which is the Torah, the law. You have the historical books, which is Joshua through Esther. And you, of course, have the wisdom books, which is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. After that, you have the major prophets and then the minor prophets. Job through Song of Songs are wisdom literature. They explore the quest for understanding, the quest for God. They're very poetic. They're not necessarily story-driven as much, though if you look at it, there are stories behind the wisdom. You would have to dig into the Song of Songs being it's considered a romantic, sort of a sensual poetry story. And Ecclesiastes is this teacher who's seeking wisdom. Psalms is the hymn book of the Bible, which was sung individually and corporally. So you can kind of look at maybe when each Psalms may have fallen in history to kind of understand it. Proverbs are this collection of wise sayings. But Job is a little interesting and unique because it has this narrative that bookends the poetry, this story of Job, and then it begins and tells the story, and then it goes into all these dialogues and conversations which are poetic and sweeping, and then it comes back to end and to tell you how the story ends. And so it's more story-driven with this great poetry, where the others are not quite that way. But they're all wisdom literature. And so Job is that one. And historically, or popularly, we use the phrase, the patience of Job, to talk about Job. And so make sure you get your Bibles out and look at Job. And before we begin, I'm going to give you an overview of it and kind of explain it to you. You might want to pause, though, after I give you the sweeping kind of overview of Job. After this section, you may want to pause and then read Job 41, which is where we're going to center in on, and then come back. Okay? All right, so let's check out the story. The story of Job is about a man who was tested, who went through every trial you can imagine. God believed in this faithful servant, but the scripture tells us in the book of Job that the adversary, the Satan, believed he could break Job. God didn't believe that would happen. God believed Job would stay faithful and said, you can test him, but do not kill him. And so Job lost his family, his children, died in a terrible Holocaust. He lost his wealth. He lost everything he had. He lost his health. His life hit rock bottom. His friends believed it had to be his fault. His fault.
but he knew it wasn't. And so the book takes us on a journey as he has this conversation with others, and his own wife even tells him he should curse God and die, or it's got to be his fault. But in the end, he faces God one-on-one, and he questions God, and he asks God's reasoning behind suffering, particularly his suffering. And God answers him out of a whirlwind. And God lets him know that God is God and he is not. And in this beautiful poetic conversation, we see many images, including the one we're going to talk about tonight, of the Leviathan.
Okay, so that's a snapshot of Job. But what I would encourage you right now to do is to take some time, pause, and go read Job 41. Just read it. And then come back and we'll talk about this beast from beneath, this monster from the deep. Go do that now, and I'll see you in a second. Okay, hopefully you've read that. And now we are going to dig in, the monster from the deep. So, I guess the question is, our monster we're mainly focusing on is the Leviathan, found in 41. When the verse says, "Can you pull the Leviathan with a fish hook, or tie down his tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he keep begging you for mercy? Will he speak to you with gentle words? Will he make an agreement with you for you to take him as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of him like a bird, or put him on a leash for your girls? Will traders barter for him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his hide with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse him. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me." Let's pause there and talk about that. So basically, if you remember my survey I just gave you of Job, Job is questioning and trying to understand suffering and why he's going through suffering and why suffering happens. He knows that this time the suffering isn't his fault. In fact, we do bring some suffering on ourselves, but most of the time it's stuff that just happens to us. And so Job has lost everything, his children, his income, his health. And though his wife is alive, she tells him to curse God and die. And he feels hopeless. His friends tell him it must be his fault. Now, this whole thing began when God and the adversary, the Satan, where we get the word Satan, the adversary in this battle in the heavenly court, are arguing over whether Job could be broken. God says, "This is my faithful servant, and no one can break him." And the Satan says, "Oh yes, I can break him." And God says, "Don't kill him, but there's no way you can break him," and allows this to happen. Interesting. We'll talk about that before we leave. Hang on. But then you have this conversation where Job speaks to God through the whirlwind. And God is reminding Job that he cannot and will not be able to understand everything because Job is a man and God is God. And that God's ways are mysterious and bigger than ours. And so then there are many examples of this found in Job. But in chapter 41, one of the illustrations God gives is saying, just like you can't control the Leviathan, just like there's this great creature you know about that you can't make a pet out of, that is so massive and vast and so strong and so powerful, just like that is out of your control. How can you consider yourself equal to God? Because God can control even the Leviathan. Maybe if we were writing this, we would talk about the power of the great whale, or a great white shark, or an elephant maybe. But this illustration is an animal that Job must know about called a Leviathan, because that's the illustration given. I'll read more of the text let me read some more about this Leviathan, and then we're going to explore who it is. Listen to the next part. "I will not fail to speak of his limbs, his strength, and his graceful form. Who can strip off his outer coat? Who could approach him with a bridle? Who dares open the doors of his mouth, ringed about his fearsome teeth? His back has rows of shields, tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted." This is a massive beast, isn't it? I mean, just visualize this creature he's describing that Job must know about called a Leviathan. Has Job ever seen this thing, or has he just heard about it? Keep hearing and listening to the description God gives. "His snorting," the Leviathan he's talking about, "throws out flashes of light. His eyes are like the rays of dawn, firebrands. stream from his mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Sounds like a dragon shooting fire out of his mouth. What kind of creature is this? Smoke pours from his nostrils as from a boiling pot over a fire of reeds. His breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from his mouth. Strength resides in his neck. Dismay goes before him. This is like some great monster. I continue. The folds of his flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. His chest is hard as a rock, hard as a lower millstone. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches them has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. So you can hit it with a sword and a spear, and you can't pierce it. I don't know a creature like that. Even an elephant can fall. A whale can be killed. This is massive. I continue. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Sling stones are like chaff to him. A club seems to him but a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depth churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. What a massive sea creature this is. You can't kill it. He laughs at it. Listen to the end. Behind him he leaves a glistening wake. One could think the deep has white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal, a creature without fear. He looks down on all that are haughty. He is king over all that are proud. What a description of a creature. What a description. The last chapter of this book is 42, and we'll mention that at the end. But let's talk about this. What is the Leviathan? I mean, any other creature, lots of animals are mentioned in the Bible that we know about, but the Leviathan, is this a creature that once existed? Is this a creature that was that powerful, that strong, that spears and swords couldn't stop it, and it came out of the depth? Was this something that people saw and knew about? What is this thing? Wow, what a creature the Leviathan is. Now, there are two creatures mentioned in the book of Job that are unusual. Two. So I'm going to mention the other one, the behemoth. You have the Leviathan in chapter 41, but in chapter 40 you have the behemoth. Let me read you about the behemoth. Are you ready? Verses 15, chapter 40 and on. Look at the behemoth, which I have made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are close knit. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God, yet his maker can approach him with his sword. The hills bring him their produce, and all the wild animals play nearby. Under the lotus plants he lies, hidden among the reeds in the marsh. The lotuses conceal him in their shadow. The poplars by the stream surround him. When the river rages, he is not alarmed. He is secure, though the Jordan should surge against his mouth. Can anyone capture him by the eyes or trap him and pierce his nose? So the behemoth and the Leviathan, these are the two that are mentioned in Job that we've described. What are they? Well, we're going to mainly focus on Leviathan, but I don't think we can ignore the other one either. The behemoth is often believed to be a hippo. When you read it and you think of hippo in chapter 40, it really does sound like that. I mean, it fits very closely as a parallel. And you could see where they're calling this hippo by that name, the hippopotamus, calling it that. And so, of course, animals long time ago, thousands of years ago, had probably different names than later on. And so that seems logical if you read chapter 40. So a lot of people are content with calling that particular creature a hippo. And if you reread that text and you can see it exactly. But in chapter 41, the Leviathan what is it? Some believe that it does not fit any other creature that we can think of. Snorting fire, swords breaking on its back. I mean, it sounds mythical. And the interesting thing about Leviathan is that it occurs in Job 3, verse 8, 41, verse 1, Psalm 74, 14, 104:26, and Isaiah 27, verse 1. 6 times in the Bible you see it. 6 times. And all occurrences are transliterated in the scriptures. But in some translations, the Leviathan, instead of being called a Leviathan, they say it's a crocodile. Some translations think this is a crocodile. And I showed you the picture when I did the overview. The problem is crocodiles don't spit fire. Crocodiles can be killed with a sword. But some say that's what it is, though. It's a crocodile. So hang on to that thought. I thought I'd read a couple of those verses from you, though, that I just mentioned to you. Let's travel through here. Job 3, verse 8 says, May those who curse days curse that day, those who are ready to rouse Leviathan. 41 verse 1 I've already read to you. We can also go to Psalm 74, verse 14, which says, "It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave him to the food to the creatures of the desert." 104, verse 26. There the ships go to and fro, and the Leviathan which you formed to frolic there. So you see it's an ocean beast. And then, of course, you've got Isaiah 27:1, the last mention, which says, "In that day the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great, and powerful sword, Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea." Now you see why I named this the monster from the deep. All right, so what are our options? One option some have used, commentators, especially a long time ago, called it a dinosaur, maybe some dinosaur that was left over that didn't die out. That really is debated by some people. Now here's the problem with that. Job didn't live in the age of dinosaurs, and dinosaurs are long gone by this time, and I don't believe that Brachiosauruses or T-Rexes or any of those creatures survived into human history. They died before that. Now, I know that you have young earth creationists and other people who believe that dinosaurs and people were together, but I do not personally accept that, nor do a lot of scholars or contemporary scholars. I do not believe that there was an overlap of that. But that is my opinion, but that is one theory some have had. Another theory, there are three more theories that I will mention to you besides dinosaur. One is that it's mythical. Stories Job had heard, and that it doesn't mean he had seen it. And so this is a story he had heard, and it's an illustration to a bigger point. That does help with a creature that can breathe fire. But many times in Job's story, the other animals, though, that are mentioned rather, are all living. So why would you have a mythical one? And this seems to be one so why would you jump back and forth, some would say? Second is that it's a poetic metaphor. And the Bible does do this in Revelation and Daniel. But again, there are real animals used. So just like the myth and the metaphor, the other animals mentioned are real. In fact, in Job 39, check this out. In Job 39, we've got the mention. Let me read this to you, and you will see it. You might be surprised that this shows up in the Bible. Job 39, 13 through 18 talks about the wings of the ostrich, and then describes the ostrich. So the ostrich shows up. So if the ostrich is real, why a symbol or of an ocean creature? Perhaps, finally, third option is that these are real animals, just understood differently. And this is where I fall. That this is perhaps some kind of ocean creature, but it is one that we would know about, or maybe it's several we know about that they confused as one, but they just didn't understand it all. These folks were pre-scientific, and so their understanding of some of the creatures might not necessarily be completely accurate. So if they saw a large crocodile, and they saw its teeth and its armored back, and heard tales that you couldn't kill it, or they had a hard time killing them, or they never knew anyone who could kill one because they were so dangerous, and they didn't know how to approach a crocodile. If you've ever seen a person with a crocodile or alligator, their jaws are strong, and you will die pretty fast. And so their experience is this thing can't be beat, and that as it snorts, it is like fire. It is ferocious. And the point of this chapter is the main thing. I'll give you a little definition of that final point. I think that real animals are often misunderstood, and before we really are scientific enough to really dig deep and to understand what an animal can and cannot do, all kinds of legends about a real animal can be created. So that's where I fall. This is probably a crocodile, or maybe some other creatures too that they all mix up as a leviathan. You know, one person sees a crocodile and thinks that the leviathan, somebody else sees a shark, somebody sees something in the ocean, who knows? But they all think they've seen the leviathan, and so all these stories are created. But I will say this, there are no such thing as monsters. I do not believe that. As much as I talked about monsters in the beginning, I am a Bigfoot doubter and denier. I am a Loch Ness Monster denier. If they find them, they're not monsters, they would be animals. But this would be the way these ancient people would understand this scary creature, whichever one it really is. But it would be an animal, and it could be an animal that went extinct. That is true. And I would say whatever animal went extinct, it did not shoot fire out of its mouth because that's not possible. But I would think the people are so terrified of it, they would read that upon it. Okay, so what's this story all about? You can believe it's a dinosaur. You can believe it's a myth. You can believe it's a metaphor. You can believe it's a misunderstood animal like I do. Whichever the point is, why? Why does it matter? And isn't that usually the case? So many people, when they read the Bible, get hung up on literalism and what's not literal and what's symbolic, when some parts of the Bible are literal and other parts are symbolic. But the point of literal and symbolic is why. So why this chapter? Well, it is saying to us several things. So are you ready? Let's dig deep. Let's come up with some answers. Are you ready? What's it saying to us? It is saying that God is God and Job, you are not. It is showing the supremacy of God, the power of God, that God can control the ocean creatures, the crocodiles, the hippos, that some things are even stronger than people, and the Leviathan being this big image of a creature, and that that humans are limited, and we're limited in physicality, we're limited in understanding, we're limited, but God is God. And it's also reminding us that God made it all. And if God made it all, God is really the one who controls it all. And through it all, God is big, but that means God is good. And the question becomes, can you control this? No. So basically the story is saying there are things in human lives that are out of control, but we have to believe in a God who can control the Leviathan, can handle the problems of our lives. This God is able to do what we can't do. Perhaps that's the main point. Job, you don't know that you think you can't handle this situation? You're right. But guess what? If God can control the air, the wind, the storms, if God can create these great beasts from below, and God is even greater than they are, God's got this. You may not understand it, Job, but God is at work. We should marvel over creation. We should marvel over God, but we should know that God is great. Okay, what's this got to do with real life? Let's see how the book of Job ends. Job 42 ends this whole journey. Job replies to God, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is it that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I do not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now and I will speak. I will question you and you shall answer me. My ears have heard you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. So they come to this dialogue back and forth between Job and God, and Job basically says, now I get it. You're God and I'm not. And I get it. And I'm humbled and I repent. I realize that I'm not God. I realize that I am limited and I need you. That's what I think he's saying. And then the story ends, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but there's an epilogue where Job, his health is restored and his family grows, and he again is able to resume life, and he lives an old life. But he has learned from his suffering. He's learned from his pain, and it has been a journey for Job. Okay. Are you ready for some application, some final thoughts? Okay, final thoughts. Monsters, I said, were not real, but then again they are. I will correct myself. They're not with horns and breathing fire, but they come by the name of tragedy, disease, COVID, war, turmoil, financial ruin. There are all kinds of monsters out there. So this story speaks to the monsters in your life, the things that you're afraid of, the things that can hurt you, the things that can threaten you and maybe destroy you. This story speaks to it. It says to you that, yeah, okay, there are monsters. Maybe not like I said, not like we think of it. There are things that frighten us. But God is bigger than that. God is bigger than the boogeyman. God is bigger than all monsters. Any monster that we face. God is bigger. It also says, that's the first thing. Secondly, it says that we're not in charge. We may be top of the food chain, but there's one above us, and that is God. Third, I think we should marvel over creation a little bit more. When you walk outside and you see a sunset or a sunrise, when you see a deer in the field or a bear in your trash can, we should marvel at the creation God has made us. We should be good stewards of it and take care of it, not pollute it and destroy it. But we also should know that nature cannot be tamed. Hurricanes and global flooding and fires out west remind us of the power and the awe of nature, and that nature can bite back, and we need to respect it. We need to take care of this planet God has given us and realize it can also be dangerous, but it is also very beautiful. Be a good steward. Enjoy the creation God has given us, but be humbled by it because it is big. But then again, God is bigger. And finally, the final thought I have for you is, above all, there will always be mystery. There are no pat answers in Job. The text does not necessarily unravel and explain suffering, disease, loss, and tragedy, which Job really wants to know. God doesn't do that. God just gives him a challenge to trust God, to believe in God, to know that God is God and that we are not. But all the answers are not given out because we do not have the minds to comprehend or understand it. And the truth is, there's a lot I don't understand. I don't understand why good people get cancer. I don't know why pandemics happen. I don't know a lot of things. But I do know that if I walk away from God, those things are still going to happen. And the despair and the loneliness they're going to bring will be great. But I do know that these things happen. And whatever ways they happen and however they happen, I don't think that God is in heaven bored and saying, hey, I'm going to give this kid an illness. But whatever happens, happens. And then God says, I can work through it if you let me. And God can show us love and grace and mercy. God can encourage us. God can help us. God can guide us. God can work through other people to give us the strength and support, because through it all, we're in this thing together. We're on this planet together, and it's time we figure that out. And in the end, we have to believe that God is at work and there is a better day coming. And God is making that happen. We have to have hope. We have to believe. We have to have faith. So there's a lot I don't understand. It's above my pay grade. But I do know that without God, it's a mess. With God, there is hope and meaning and purpose. And there's a better day coming. God bless you as you leave this Bible study. Until we see you again.